This video is brought to you by Sailrite. In this video, we're going to be showing you how to make a grill cover. After watching this video, you'll actually be able to make your own grill cover that's actually made for the shape of your grill. No more of these cookie cutter grill covers that are made of inferior fabrics from a department store. Do it yourself and make a better cover and save. Angela from the Sailrite Loft is going to show us how it's done. Here's a sneak peek of the panels that will need to be created for our grill. You can see here these that are circled are the same on the other side, the same size at least for our grill. For our grill we need 7 panels, but we only need to pattern for 1 and measure for 3. We're going to begin by patterning the lid. On the opposite side, it's the same shape, so we only need 1 pattern for this. For all the other panels, we're going to use measurements instead of patterning. Here we're using Durascrim pattern material that you can purchase from Sailrite, and we've cut a piece of it so that it matches the lid on the side. And we're using a Sharpie marker and marking on that pattern material around the perimeter of the grill, following the contour. Along the bottom lip of the pattern material, you'll notice there's approximately 1 inch of extra pattern material. We'll be using that for the seam allowance. Now Angela strikes a line approximately 1 inch from that line she did earlier, and this will be used for the seam allowance. We'll probably not use an entire inch for seam allowance because we want the cover to be a little bit loose. We don't want it super tight. That's why it's a 1 inch seam allowance, though we'll probably only use a ½ inch of it when we sew it together. Now that the lid side is done, we can concentrate on the middle panel. This is a look at the middle panel, the front side, and here's the back side. There's no need to pattern anymore. Now we can just take measurements. We're using a tape measure here, draping it over the lid of the grill all the way to the floor. And notice there's about 6 inches of excess tape laying on the floor. That will be used for a sleeve later on. Go over the top of the grill to the back side, and there on the back side there's also 6 inches of tape laying on the floor, and as well that'll be used for the sleeve. For this middle panel, we'll measure across the lid from one end to the opposite, and here you can see it's about 29 inches. We want to add 1 inch to that, so 30 inches for our grill. That completes the measurements for the middle panel. Write those measurements down. Now we'll concentrate on the table panel. This is the panel that lays across the tables on the sides. The same procedure will be used to take measurements for this table panel. We'll go over the table down to the floor along the front and leave 6 inches of tape on the floor. Then going over the table to the back side, we'll leave 6 inches of tape there as well, which gives us a measurement of 101 inches for our grill. Then we'll take a measurement from the lid all the way to the end of the table. It's about 14 inches. We want to add 1 inch, so 15 inches. Now let's verify that the table is exactly the same on the opposite end. And it is. It's about 14 inches, so 15 inches, exactly the same. So we'll need 2 table panels, but they're exactly the same size. Only one more measurement to take, and that's for the table end. Well, again, we'll just take measurements here as well. Measure from the top of the table down to the floor and add 6 inches, just as we did previously. For ours, it's 40 inches. Then we'll measure across the width of the table. It's 19 inches, and we'll add 1 inch, making it 20 inches for our table. Okay, after measuring and patterning one panel, we're ready. We can cut out our panels. Here's a look ahead at the panels after they've been cut out. Notice there are 7 panels. 3 of them are exactly the same. Before we start cutting the panels, we want to show you the possible most optimal way to lay the panels for best cloth usage. Now, for all grills, this won't always be the same. We're using a 60-inch fabric, but your grill may be larger and you may have to nest differently. Angela's using a number 2 pencil, some rulers and yardsticks, and marking on the fabric to determine the size of each one of those panels. We're using a Surelast fabric, which is a polyester fabric, and there is a right side and a wrong side. On the back side, there's a urethane coating. So notice that as she patterns this lid panel, she flipped the panel to do the opposite one. That's because we have to make sure that we have the wrong side on the inside of the grill when we're done. This material can be cut out with scissors, though a hot knife can also be used to help prevent the unraveling of the fabric, though unraveling is minimal. After the panels have been cut out, here's a look ahead. The middle panel, the two table panels, the two table ends, and the two lid sides. In this shot, you can see the panels that have been roughly organized to show how they will be assembled. We're going to go back to the grill and take one more measurement. This will determine where the lid side will be sewn onto the main body. So she's measuring from the top of the table all the way to the floor and adding 6 inches as she did previously. And there we are. At 41 inches is where we want the lid panel to be joined to the main body. On the main body panel, she measures up from that edge 41 inches and places a mark on both sides. She's marking on the outside surface of this Sure-Last fabric. Now she's going to take the side lids, or the lid sides, and she's going to position them roughly how they would be sewn on. She'll start at that mark she placed, and notice how they'll be sewn. That's an imitation of how they'll be sewn. So she takes the second panel, lays it so that the outside surfaces are facing each other. You can see that urethane coating by the darker gray. Now she takes it to the sewing machine and prepares to sew. We're sewing this on the Sailrite 111 sewing machine with the MCSCR power system, and notice we're using the deluxe magnetic guide as a kind of like a table saw fence to help guide the fabric. She is positioning the lid side and rolling it around so that the edges of the lid side are even with the edge of the main body panel. Sewing across the top, she comes to the next corner, matching up those edges. She'll bury her needle, watch, by rolling the balance wheel by hand. There it is. Now she can make very aggressive changes to the fabric without losing her position. And then she pulls the fabric, or the lid panel, all the way over to the edge of the main body panel, matching up those edges all the way down to the bottom edge. And here she'll stop sewing and reverse to lock the stitch in place. Okay, there's one side panel. Now we just have to do the same to the opposite. We need the outside surfaces to be facing each other as they are, and she flips the entire main body panel. She's going to sew this so that the lid panel, or the lid side, is on the bottom side, and the main body panel is on the top side. So here she starts sewing right where that lid panel starts, and she'll sew down it the exact same way she did with the opposite side, except for that this main body panel is on top. That's the only difference. So we'll not show all of this. Before we go, I want to mention that if you do not have the deluxe magnetic guide, you could use masking tape as a guide and tape that to the bed of your sewing machine. However, I highly recommend the deluxe magnetic guide available from Sailrite. Alright, now the two lid sides are sewn on to the main body panel. Next, we'll take the two table panels and we'll sew those on to the edges of the main body panel. The outside surfaces are facing each other here, and we'll start at that corner and sew a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge, and again we're using the deluxe magnetic guide. When we get to the portion where the lid is, notice what Angela does here. Here's the lid where it starts, and she's going to follow the edge of the lid here, so she's going to take a slight turn. She buries her needle with the balance wheel, makes adjustments to the fabric so that the lid edge is now what she's following, and then continues to sew. Now she's coming to where the lid ends, and watch what she does here as well. Comes to the junction of the main body panel, buries her needle with the balance wheel, makes major adjustments, rolling that fabric around so the edges are flush, pulls that panel on top and then continues to sew. Now when you get to the end, don't be alarmed if you have a few extra inches of fabric that are longer than the other panel. Here you can see we have about 2.5 inches of excess fabric. That's often the case, mainly due to the fact that our measuring wasn't extremely precise, and also there's some shrinkage that sometimes happens, so that's okay. Now she'll turn that whole main body panel over and sew the opposite side, just as we did with the previous, though this, the side, or the table panel, is on the bottom side and the main body panel is on the top side. Here she's coming to that junction where the lid was sewn onto the main body panel, and she follows the same procedure as she did on the opposite. We'll not show all of this because we're just doing the same thing with those panels that we did on the other one, except for the fact that the main body panel is on the top side this time. Remember to always have the right side of the fabric facing each other. And here at the end you can see we're about 1 inch off. That's completely acceptable. Do some reversing to lock the stitch in place. Now we have the 2 table panels attached. Now we'll concentrate on the table ends. We'll lay out the main body panel so that we can see where the lid panel has been sewn on. And then we'll place that table end so that it's centered between the lid side, and it may be a different size. Then mark it with a pencil along the table panel so that we can determine where it should be sewn on. Then we'll place the table end panel underneath that main body panel so the outside surfaces are facing each other. We're going to be sewing that onto the table panel. We'll start 1 inch back from the edge of that panel. Though it doesn't look like it here in the video, we are sewing 1 inch back from that corner. That's because we'll need to sew the opposite side in a later step, and leaving 1 inch like this is important to sew the opposite end. So now we'll sew down its length, matching up the edges as done previously, all the way down its length. When we get to the corner of the table end, that's the panel underneath, Angela will bury her needle, and then she'll pull that table end panel around, matching up the edges. Notice the needle's buried so we don't lose our position. She pulls that panel around and then sews down that edge, matching up the main body panel, which is on top. When we get to the end, you'll notice it's not extra flush. It's off by 1 inch or so. That's okay. Even if it's up to 2 to 3 inches, it's okay. Now we're going to flip that entire panel around and concentrate on finishing the table end and sewing it on. Here's where we left that inch unsewn. So she starts there and then continues to sew to the corner, buries her needle, pulls the end panel around so the edges are flush, and sews down its length as well. Skipping ahead to the end, notice that we're a couple inches off here as well. No big deal. We'll be trimming that later. Alright, we want to repeat that same procedure for the opposite side. This is that same clip, but the procedure is exactly the same. And we'll start sewing 1 inch away from that corner, just as we did previously. And we're going to skip ahead. No reason to show all of this because you just completed it and we don't want to bore you. Everything is now sewn together. Now we can trim that bottom edge. This is the edge that will have a sleeve inserted so that we can install a shock cord. Notice she starts at each one of the seams and she trims off the excess to the next seam. So start where it's overlapped and trim to the corner. Don't need to be extremely precise here because we don't want the cover to necessarily touch the floor, but we want to cover the entire grill. You can take some measurements if you'd like to confirm that it's going to be long enough or not too long, but we're pretty confident that it's going to fit right, so we're not going to take measurements. If you'd like to, you can take some measurements and then decide how much you should trim off if you like. This is the forward edge. We're going to follow that seam down and install 2 grommets so that we can make adjustments near the front of the cover. These 2 grommets will be placed on opposite sides of the seam, approximately 3 inches up from the raw edge of the fabric, and this is where the shock cord will be tensioned around the entire perimeter of the cover. Because a grommet should usually go through more than one layer of fabric, we're going to cut some squares out of the scrap fabric. So we're just cutting a few squares and we're applying double-sided tape to those. We're only going to do 1 square per grommet. However, 2 is probably a good idea so the grommet goes through 3 layers. Then we'll baste them right over the area that we're going to install the grommet in. We'll now place the premium cutting block on the underside to prevent damage from the hole cutter, and we're using a number 0 hole cutter that you can purchase from Sailrite, or you can just cut an X with a razor blade here to allow the male portion of the grommet to protrude through the hole. We're using number 0 spur grommets. These grommets have teeth and are a little bit tougher than a common washer or a plain washer grommet. However, because this application doesn't call for a lot of strength, a common washer or plain grommet washer can be used as well. They're less expensive. Now that the grommets have been installed, we're going to create our sleeve for the shock cord. First, we're going to run double-sided tape around the entire perimeter, the bottom edge of the grill cover. This double-sided tape is great because it helps to hold seams and hold fabric in place while you take it to the sewing machine and sew. Now we're going to insert our shock cord through one of the grommet holes with the knot on the outside of the cover. And then we'll run the shock cord around the perimeter of the cover as we create our sleeve. We'll peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and then we'll fold the material up just a little bit over that grommet that we installed earlier. And we'll try to consistently fold it around the entire perimeter that same distance, inserting the shock cord in the sleeve as we fold the material. Alright, we skipped ahead here to the end, and we want to cut the shock cord, insert it into the grommet, and then tie a knot on the end of that to keep it in place so that it doesn't fall out. First, we need to stick that sleeve down with that double-sided tape. Now we'll take it over to the sewing machine, and watch here, she's going to actually fold the material so the grommets are very close to the folded edge at the bottom. So it's not going to be a single folded hem or sleeve, it's going to be a double folded hem or sleeve. So she folds the material as she sews it. She's going to start here, reversing a little bit, and then she's going to fold the material about 2 foot away from the needle, ensuring that it is folded accurately the way that she wants it, and then she'll sew up to that 2 foot area where her fingers or her hand is holding the fabric in place, and then she'll fold another section of fabric back at 2 foot away from the sewing machine. Watch the process. Okay, she's almost to her hand. She stops sewing, the needle's buried. Now she makes a fold again about 2 foot away, and she'll hold that with her hand and sew up to her hand yet again. Repeat that process all the way around the perimeter. Oh, and also be sure not to sew in the shock cord. The shock cord should be into the fold on the outer portion of the cover. Do not sew the shock cord in. Make sure that it's in the sleeve, free to move. Here's what the outside looks like. Looks great. And here we're coming to the point where we started, and we'll reverse to lock the stitch in place there as well. You are done sewing. We're going to take this to the cover and tension the shock cord, but we wanted to show you how easy it is to cut it with a hot knife to help prevent the shock cord from unraveling as it is on the ends. If you don't have the Sailrite Edge hot knife, you could use a wood burning tool, a soldering gun, or a lighter. Be careful that things don't catch fire if you use those tools. Now let's see how it fits on the grill. We have not yet tensioned the bottom sleeve yet. We'll do that first thing. Once it's tensioned, it can be tensioned for its lifetime, or it can be readjusted if it ever becomes loose. So once it's tensioned, it should be easy to remove it and to reinstall it again without having to pre-tension it or release the tension. Here where the shock cord exits the cover, she's tensioning the shock cord. There'll be a lot of bunched up fabric here, but she'll distribute that after she gets the shock cord tensioned the appropriate amount. And then she ties a knot here. This will basically be a permanent knot. We're not going to show cutting it with a hot knife, though we do recommend doing that once you've determined how tight you want your cover to fit. We're going to cut it with scissors. Now she'll take that ruffle and distribute it evenly around the entire perimeter of the cover. Here it is complete. Notice that the cover is not too snug. It's still easy to remove and install. And you can see that Angela doing that now. The nice thing about making your own grill cover is the fabric you purchase is much more superior than those cheap covers that you can get at a department store. It's time to get cooking. Here's a material list of all the items that you'll need to make your own custom fit grill cover. Recommended fabric choices can be found at the Sailrite website. For more free videos like this, be sure to check out the Sailrite website or subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel today. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos possible. Thanks for your support.